And Warm Trophy Kids presented by Bad News Media. It is week 1 of college football. Trophy Kids, we've got 5 days straight of college football action. It's the best time of year. We finally have real games on TV, a full slate of games. I know we had the week 0 appetizer last week. I could not be more excited, though. I'm going to break down the week 1 slate. Michael will be back for the NFL podcast, though, and we'll break that down. But this one will be a little quicker. Those who have been with the Trophy Kids podcast before know that week 1, we're not talking in depth a ton of games because there are the preview episodes out there. All Power 4 conference previews are out. It's timestamped, so you can go find teams quickly. This is just going to be a rehash of some of that applied more to the matchups that we're seeing. A couple bets that I like. The following weeks, we're going to get real nitty gritty with it, deep diving those matchups, but we still got some good information here for you. Still got some betting action, some things that I will be looking at this week. And we're going to start off recording this on Thursday, like always, so it's dropping Friday. If you're not following on social at Trophy Kids Pod or following me, the Trophy Kid, on TikTok or Instagram, you missed out on the Colorado bet. We'll see if that hits. We have the team total, Colorado over 33.5. UNC Minnesota game will be interesting. Obviously, this is dropping Friday morning, so it will have already happened. I tend to think that this is a massively important game for both these teams and both these programs, both these head coaches. Depending on who wins or loses this game, that head coach is going to sort of start to be on the hot seat a little bit, I think. For UNC, it's definitely concerning that right now, we'll see if it actually plays out that way. Who knows? Maybe Mac Brown's, having a little gamesmanship here. But playing 2 quarterbacks just means you don't have a quarterback. Now, in UNC's case, they have one of the best backs in the country. So, there's going to be a lot of running in that game, I think. And for PJ Fleck, there needs to be a little bit of resurgence, some new vibes into this program, I think, because they're starting to struggle to adjust here. But we'll see. We'll go from there. But we're starting off with Penn State, West Virginia. Line is at 8, over under 51.5. James Franklin is the biggest beneficiary ever. Like, this is the year of James Franklin because you no longer have divisions in the Big Ten and the expanded playoffs, because he was never making the playoffs the way it was formatted. Now Penn State can kind of backdoor their way into the playoffs. They don't have to deal with a, monster division that they could never really get through with Ohio State and Michigan being the gatekeepers there. This is a team, talked about it in their preseason breakdown, that if you're buying Penn State this year, I think you're buying it because of their coordinators. Tom Allen and Andrew Klinicki are absolutely fantastic. And they're going to need to be, I think, in this game. This is going to be a real test to see kind of what influence they might have, a measurable mark for them. All right, sorry, folks. Right as we sit down to record, had to take an important phone call. So Penn State. If you're buying Penn State this year, I think you're buying it because they're coordinators, like I just said, and in the preseason breakdown, like Tom Allen at DC, Andrew Klinicki coming over from Kansas as the OC is absolutely massive, I think, for Penn State, because Penn State was virtually zero threat offensively in a deep ball perspective last season. Drew Allar, 137th out of 159 quarterbacks from an ADOT standpoint. We got to increase that this season. And I think Andrew Kolnicki, from an offensive scheme standpoint, is going to help this offense be more threatening, pose a bigger threat to these defenses. You can't just load boxes here. You're going to have to be prepared for multiple things. He shows a ton of different looks. He gets very creative with things. I loved what he did with the Kansas offense. So offensively, let's see what they do against West Virginia here, because West Virginia's secondary should be a secondary that they can test. This is a secondary that may show some cracks early just due to what they've lost there. Defensively, though, Tom Allen, I think, Manny did a fantastic job with the defense. I talked about it in the preseason breakdown for Penn State. This defensive line especially doesn't have the same type of elite talent that they had last year, but it's still a very good defense. And Tom Allen, from a defensive mind, forget what you think about him as a head coach. As a defensive-minded guy, is very sound. And he's going to adjust some things to fit this defense and the personnel they have, which I really like. I hate when coordinators just kind of come in and say, we're just running my scheme with zero real adjustment, no real assessment for what you have and what you're capable of, because it doesn't allow you to maximize strengths and minimize the weaknesses. And that's all coaching really is how do I maximize the strengths of my unit and how do I minimize their deficiencies? So I like that. West Virginia, this is a team that I think I'm a little higher on than some other people, at least from an offensive standpoint. Look, this team absolutely balled out last year. They beat every expectation last year. They come in, expectations are going to be a little bit higher for them for sure. You're in a Big 12, though, that is very competitive. Like, let's make no mistake about it. West Virginia is going to be in a conference that is very, very competitive. Anybody can really win this. Neil Brown did a fantastic job when he took over the offense last year. You know, he's a head coach. He's on the hot seat. He says, my job is on the line. Let me take over this offense and see what I can do. And you absolutely saw an offense that accelerated because he did exactly what I was just talking about there. Maximize their strengths, minimize their weaknesses. And it started with Green at quarterback. Green had a very successful last season because, Brown came in and basically said, all right, if the deep ball's there, take it. If not, let's kind of show your athleticism. And then on certain plays, we're just looking to get the ball out quick. So it was very simple offense last year. It's either we're getting the ball out quick to a very specific read on this play, or we're taking a deep shot here. If the deep shot's not there, just take off and use your athleticism. And that worked very well for this West Virginia offense. Let's see what they can kind of do. This is a great barometer for these two teams. I do think Penn State has the edge here in this game. I don't have a bet that I feel great about here. But I think this is a spot where we're really trying to get eyeballs on these two teams to really gauge what they're going to be long-term. That's the name of the game in week 1. It's get as much eyeballs on as many games as possible, digest that information, and let's get off and running for the season. Let's see if our preseason work was right, if we were misled anywhere, kind of where we're at. Clemson, Georgia, the line is at 13.5, over under 48.5. I love this game because this is another barometer game. I don't think this is a panic moment for Clemson's fans if you lose this game. And I'm going to talk about that in a second, but let's focus on Georgia. Let's focus on the Georgia offense versus this Clemson defense. This is a game where I think Georgia's going to have to put the ball in Beck's hands and let him go out there and test this secondary that lost a lot of talent. Clemson is in a transitional phase for their defense, lost a ton of talent to the NFL. You're getting a new green dot. You're trying out some guys in the secondary. It's a young secondary. The defensive line is shifting guys around. Like, I think we're going to see Peter Woods play more on the edge instead of inside, which will be a little interesting to see. We've got news that Lewis, the guys that are kind of battling, Lewis and Jaden, I believe, both got hurt in scrimmage. They're kind of battling to be the opposite side of Terrell in that secondary. So let's see if, Bex can kind of come out firing early in this game. Let's see what Mike Bobo does. From that standpoint. I talked about it in their preseason breakdown. You're replacing Beck's like two almost crutches, and they were great crutches to have. Bowers and Ladd, both off to the NFL. I think the tight end room won't step off that much. Like, there will be some step off, but I do like Delp in the tight end room. I think this offense is going to utilize him heavy here. We'll see if Etienne really sits on the sideline due to the off-field issues. Their running back situation can be interesting in this game. So it's going to be really, I think, putting the ball into Beck's hands. Can he go out and win this game? From a Clemson standpoint, I think Clemson over the long term this season is going to be improved. This is the first game. It is a brutal first game. You're trying out all these new pieces defensively. You're in this defensive transition year, but offensively, I think the stock arrow is pointing up for Clemson this season. Wide receiver got thinned out last year due to injuries. This year, you step into a much, much better wide receiver situation, not only from a health standpoint, but they absolutely love their two freshmen coming in here. And TJ Moore, who looked fantastic in the Army All-Star game, and Brian Wesco, who there's a massive amount of hype on. Let's see how they look in their first game. But I expect Clemson to try to test out this Georgia defense. I talked about the Georgia defense in the SEC preview. I think this is a year removed next year. They're going to be that elite Georgia defense that we're used to seeing. That's not to say they're not going to be good this year. Let's not get it twisted. I don't need Georgia fans coming after me. This is a very talented, very good defense. But I'm talking about that elite of the elite. I think Georgia is a year away from that, but we're going to see in this game. It's going to be a good test. And the reason I think they're a year away from that is look at that interior part of the Georgia defensive line. There's no Jalen Carter, I don't think, in that part of it. There's no Jordan Davis. Like, Stackhouse and Brenson are very good, though. Like, they're talented guys inside, but there's not that elite, dominant game changer internally. The linebacker room, ultra talented. I mean, young and loaded with talent, but it's young. So are they a year away like I think they are, or are they more ahead of schedule? Let's see. I can't wait to see that. I do think Clemson's going to test that internal part of that defensive line early. They're going to get Maffa going, who's going to be their bell cow. You're going to need Cade to step up, though. And I just don't think he's going to be able to be the quarterback you need to be an elite team again. But I do think long-term for Clemson over the course of the season, they're going to be just fine. The defense is going to figure it out. Offensively, they pose a bigger threat. I love Matt Luke, the offensive line coach. Like, that's another part of this game. Like, I don't think the offensive line is going to be great to start the season. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. We'll see. But Matt Luke, I'm buying his long-term stock at Clemson. Like, the arrow is pointing up, I think, for Clemson this season, just not this game. I do think Georgia at the end of the day is going to kind of handle this one and be just fine. Virginia Tech, Vandy. I love Virginia Tech. I gave their team total out on their breakdown at 7.5 earlier in the preseason. If you're a fan of the YouTube page and subscribed, you would have gotten that bet. So if you're not, make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube page. Gave their win total out. I am taking Virginia Tech at minus 13.5 this week. The U versus Florida. Fantastic matchup. Line is set at 2.5, over under 54. This is the most important game in Mario Cristobal's career at the U. You cannot go into the swamp and lose this game. This is vitally important. I talked about in the ACC show about why it's so important. But I think this is going to be a game that comes down to conditioning, and I don't really love the Florida strength and conditioning program. I talked about it in their preseason breakdown. Let's see. Let's see if Miami tries to give a little up tempo here. Let's see if Miami tries to push this defense and see, are they in shape right now? Because I think there are some concerns there, and you see it late in games here. The Cam Ward aspect of this is very interesting for Miami. I think we're starting to see a little bit more overhype on him. I hope he's good. He's an electric player, but he has got a kind of oopsie daisy bug to him. Like, when you look at the turnover worthy throws, his interception to touchdown rate was good at Washington State. But when you look at his turnover worthy throws that PFF tracks, he's not that far off. He's pretty similar to Tyler Van Dyke. Now, part of that could be, you're on a less talented team. You're trying to make things happen. But let's see if those bad potential habits follow him to the U, because I'm going to tell you right now, Mario Cristobal isn't helping solve those. He's probably adding more bad habits to Cam Ward's repertoire here. So let's see if going into the swamp, feeling you have to get a big win, all that pressure adds up, and we get some turnover issues potentially from the U. Florida's standpoint, I think Florida, there's been a lot of talk about the schedule. It is an absolute nightmare of a schedule. It's the hardest schedule in college football. It's arguably the hardest I've seen in the last decade or two. I mean, I could not think of a harder schedule in recent memory. It's an absolute bear, but that doesn't mean this is a bad team. I think that's what's getting lost in translation for Florida. Like, this is still a very good team. Billy Napier, contrary to popular belief, it's week 1 for us, folks, is a very good quarterback developer, I think. Like, he does a really good job of developing the quarterback position. We saw that last year. Graham Mertz had his best season, I thought, of his career so far. Let's see if he can take that next step. Offensive line could be a little bit of a concern. Let's see. I think, once again, if Billy Napier can get to 6 wins, he should be safe. It's going to be a bear. This game is going to be really tough. At the end of the day, when I look at this team, I give a downgrade to Miami, not because of talent, but because of coaching. My thoughts on Mario Cristobal have been well explained on this podcast. I don't think he's very good. It's going to come down to conditioning, I think. Like, who's got their hands on their hips in the fourth? Who can go up tempo in key spots of the game? Can Florida push the tempo a little bit here? I think if they can push the tempo, and that's signaling, hey, we think we're in better football shape right now, let's test it early. That's a huge sign for Florida. So I'm going to be watching for that type of thing. And it's going to be a nice little mile marker type of game. Notre Dame versus Texas A&M. The line is at 3 right now, over under 46.5. Defense. That is the name of the game here. I think when I think of these two games, or these two teams in this game, and I think back to the preseason episodes I did on them and the breakdowns, the questions were offense for both these teams. It's, what are these offenses going to look like? What is the quarterback play going to look like? What is the offensive line play going to look like? I mean, Notre Dame's offensive line only has like 6 combined starts right now. It's incredible how kind of young this offensive line is. Riley Leonard, though, is an escaped artist. Like his ability to maneuver within the pocket, to be mobile, has been absolutely fantastic. There are reports that say he's pretty good. Like he showed up to the Manning camp this summer, looked good. Like he's been good in the offseason. His mobility is going to be needed here, I think. Defensively, though, these are two teams that it's a defensive warfare right now. You've got a Notre Dame team. Al Golden, I think, is the unsung hero of this Notre Dame program right now. Defensively, Notre Dame has been really good, and they continue to get better. I mean, Watts in the back end is just an absolute nightmare for offense. You have to know where he is. Can Connor Wegman live up to the potential? Can he spot him and make sure that you're avoiding him a little bit and not falling into the traps that Watts sets? Because that's going to be very important. It's going to be a defensive masterclass. I do like the under here. I think this is going to be a slugfest, low possession games. Offenses are going to struggle early here. You're down at Texas A&M. Notre Dame needs to get off quick here, but I do like an under here at 46.5. LSU USC. Woo! Offense. Complete polar difference from Notre Dame, Texas A&M. Line is at 4, over under 64. There have been reports trickling out from the coaching staff, I should say. This isn't just like guys kind of speculating. The coaching staff has sort of given some indication that the LSU defense is starting to click because they simplified some things. Just so in the early part of the season, guys could kind of run around and be free. You got a hard test against Lincoln Riley's offense here. I talked about in the USC preview show. You can go back and watch the Big Ten episode. Everything's time-stamped. There is a drop-off in quarterback play, obviously. Nobody is crazy enough to say not. But Moss offers a little bit something different than what Caleb Williams does. Caleb Williams is an elite quarterback. No questions about it. Fantastic. He really loved, though, kind of holding on the ball, turning things into kind of some backyard football, getting big explosive plays, where Moss is more on time with it, getting the ball out quick, playing within the system. And there's disadvantages and advantages to both of that. I'm interested to see how this operates. In the small sample size we got of Moss playing in this system, he did very well. Let's see if that can continue. I'll be very, very interested to see what that looks like moving forward here. Defensively, USC is going to be good. Better, I should say. Not good. They're going to be better. Hard not to be better. They're going to get bullied in this game, I think, by that LSU offensive line. The LSU offensive line might be the best offensive line in college football this season. I mean, they have legit 4 guys that might go pro on that offensive line and be good. It's an absolutely fantastic. And the USC defensive line, I think, might be a little undersized. We'll see. This is a good game to test that. It'll be interesting. I do think we're going to see a little bit kind of thunder down under for LSU this season, less spread it out and letting athletes be athletes and more kind of consolidation, using more heavy tight end sets. They got a nice tight end room. Quarterback play should be pretty decent for them. I think when you look at this team, it's obviously going to be a drop off. Hard not to be when you're the number 1 offense in EPA by a mile. You're going to have some level of drop off, obviously. Garrett Nussmeier, though, has been in the system a while. He understands it. He's aggressive. Like, he's not afraid to push the ball down the field. You're losing the mobility factor that you had with Daniels in previous last season, which could hurt them there. But I think offensively, they're going to be pretty solid here. This is a major offensive game. I think the other part of this game that will be interesting is special teams. Zachary Branch for USC. He might make a play or two here. So I do think an over's in play here, even at 64. I'll take it. All right, last game to talk about before we talk about some win totals I gave out earlier on the preseason shows, and some I've added, is BC versus Florida State. Line is at 15.5 last I saw, over under 50. FSU. I mean, what a disaster from a coaching standpoint that game was in Ireland. An absolute disaster. This was an FSU team that I said in their preseason breakdown, best case scenario, if you max out on development, there's talent on this roster. If you max out on development, you max out on scheme, this is a team that could compete for an ACC championship. And by doing so, gives them an opportunity to backdoor their way into the playoffs. Like, this is not a national championship contender team. This isn't a team that's probably going to go deep into a playoff run. This is a stopgap year. So you got to maximize development. You got to maximize scheme. You got to be really good bringing it, and let's see what happens. The coaching staff was miserable. I don't know what Adam Fuller's doing defensively. With some of those rotations, this was a game where there was 14 possessions. I saw today that those 14 possessions, total 14 possessions, is the lowest amount of possessions in a college football game in the last 4 years. There are Iowa games with better pace than what we saw in the Florida State-Georgia Tech game. Why are some of these players seeing the field? Like, you're not trying to conserve players here. You got to have your best players on. And you saw it, I think, most impacted at the linebacker spot because guys are just not firing. They're out of position. You're not playing your best guys. Like, the linebackers were really not good for FSU. We can say what we want about the lines. They were definitely underwhelming. The linebacker room was a room that I flagged as a potential concern for Florida State, and it absolutely was a liability for them in that Georgia Tech game. Offensively, I don't think Mike Ravel called a very good game for what the offense is capable of this season. I know DJU is not this all-world beater, world-class quarterback, but like an ADOT of like -1 yards in the first half. What are we doing? Like, you have to present some threat. It was just a bad game, I thought, but I don't think it's hit panic button yet on this Florida State team. I think there were some circumstances that played into that. Their travel was a bit of a nightmare to get over to Ireland. Slick surface. This was a coaching staff to me that I give a lot of credit to. I think they're great at developing players. I think schematically they're very good because they're adjustable to what they have. This was a coaching staff that felt like they don't really know what they have yet. And that's alarming for sure because it's now week 1, but it was week 0. You're still trying to figure it out live. This is going to be a big game for them, especially defensively, because Castellano, I apologize if I messed up his name. I always do it for the BC quarterback. He's a incredibly mobile guy. He's going to look like the reincarnation of Lamar Jackson out there. If the linebackers can't get going here, if the defensive line can't hold there and sustain their edges and get some pressure here, if you make him a pure passer, like, Florida State should just absolutely dog walk this Florida State defense should dog walk this BC offense, I think. But if linebackers are out of position, if they're getting beat outside the tackles like Georgia Tech did, it could be a long day for the Florida State defense versus this BC offense. FSU offense versus this BC defense, I have less concerns about because I think we're going to see Mike Norvell, at least what I pulled away from that game, is Florida State did a fantastic job when they looked to play bully ball in the run game. 2 running back sets, 2 tight end sets, really consolidating. Power run was incredibly efficient for them. You got to, though, allow DJ to try to throw the ball a little bit more here, I think. You just got to take some shots and some risk with him. He's also got to become a more willing runner. I know he's yet to do it in his college career. This is your last year of ball, bud. Ball out. You got to be more willing to run. I don't think it's panic button yet or panic city for Florida State as a whole, but I do think there are parts of this team that they got to get some things figured out very quickly. And I believe in the coaching staff. I think they do a great job of developing at Florida State, but they were pitiful in that Georgia Tech game. And that was apparent from anybody that was watching. The rotations were head scratching. The game plan was even more head scratching, I thought. It was a disaster all around. Let's see how they regroup. But I do think there's an edge here for Florida State. I'm not completely panicking. I don't think an ACC championship run is out of the question yet. But this is going to be a big time to answer the questions against BC. All right. With that, let's kind of round out some win totals that I gave out / am on this season. Kentucky over 6.5, Louisville under 8.5. I did end up taking Colorado under 5.5. The Colorado one's an interesting one. I talked about it on their preview. I think this team did a much better job in the transfer portal acquiring talent. I think that elevates them by a win, maybe 2, just on a talent. If nothing from a coaching standpoint changes, I think they're a win or 2 better than last year's team. But it's much easier to win unders than it is overs because of the injury factor. And what is this new coaching staff from an offense and defensive coordinator standpoint going to look like? How do they maximize talent and minimize strengths? if Dion and the coaching staff have maxed out development, have really learned from the mismanagement of in-game situations last year, if the schemes are really good, maybe this team and what is a chaos-filled Big 12 can eke out another win or two. I don't necessarily think so, but I think this is a team fighting for a bowl spot. Bowling is the goal, but it's always easier to win an under than it is an over. And that's why I took the under 5.5, because there are some position groups. Wide receivers, fine. Defensive line's fine if they sustain some injuries. There's tons of depth there. Secondary sustains an injury, level of concern goes up. Running back room sustains an injury, a lot of concern goes up. Linebacker room sustains even a injury, a lot of concern goes up. Offensive line sustains an injury. It's very surface level talent, with the exception of the wide receiver room and defensive line room, which I think have a lot of talent and are very good and are going to be real strengths for this team. Outside of the secondary is a massive strength for them. But once again, it's frontline talent. I don't know if they have the depth there. So I took them under 5.5. UCF, if you listen to the Big 12 preview, I did go ahead and give this one out. This is a unique one. UCF under 7.5, but taking a shot on them to win the Big 12 championship. You can go to the Big 12 preview. It's timestamped, the explanation as to why that's the betting strategy and how I feel about this team. I'm pretty excited about them, but you'll see why that's the betting strategy is available there. I did go ahead and lay a very small wager on what was it? Sorry, I'm looking here. Clemson to win the ACC because of longevity there, but the ACC is a bit of a muddled mess. I don't believe in Mario Cristobal. I think NC State could pose a threat. I think Florida State, if they max out on the development, can pose a bit of a threat, but that's an interesting one. I took a little bit of a flyer on Alabama to win the SEC. I don't have as much confidence, but the odds are so good that we may get into some hedge territory later down in the road. And then Virginia Tech over 8 or 7.5 I gave out early in the preseason show. So those are some win total overs that I've got. Some of the betting games, like I said, I like Virginia Tech minus 13.5. I like the team total in Colorado Thursday night. I gave it on social at 33.5. I like what was the other one? LSU USC over 64. May give out some additional bets, so make sure you're following on social at Trophy Kids Pod or the Trophy Kid for me personally. That's the college football show. It's a little bit of a quicker one this time, just some more rounding out of thoughts against the matchups. If you want the big in-game or the big team breakdowns, make sure to go check out the preview episodes. A lot of great information in there. Those are time-stamped. And then we'll be back for the NFL show here starting soon. College football will be back next week. Let's enjoy these 5 weeks of college football. I absolutely love this time of year. And as always, peace.